Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. John F. Kennedy once said that leadership and learning are indispensable to each other, and we feel the same way at Barry-Wehmiller. We often talk about our leadership journey because our transformation into a people-centric organization has come from many twists and turns along a road of discovery about how to create workplaces that offer meaning and fulfillment to our team members. We are very committed to stepping back to see what we've learned along the way and then applying it to bring about positive change within the organization. Jacob Morgan is an author and speaker who studies how workplaces are changing and developing. He's written 2 books, The Collaborative Organization and The Future of Work, Attract New Talent, Build Better Leaders, and Create a Competitive Organization. He also founded the Future of Work Community, a council of forward-thinking organizations who come together to explore the future of work. And he hosts the Future of Work podcast, where he interviews some of the world's foremost business leaders, on which our CEO Bob Chapman was honored to be interviewed. But Jacob doesn't just study the future of work. Through all his initiatives, he then takes that information and helps facilitate change in other organizations. If leadership is a journey, Jacob's like a tour guide, helping leaders go to places they may not have known about or found on their own. Jacob helps to create dialogues in organizations so it will foster a continuum of learning and make it a better place. So here's Jacob Morgan, author, speaker, and as he'll explain, futurist.
From my perspective, a futurist is somebody that looks at how things are changing and uses various, techniques to do that. There are ways to look at trends. Their books have been written around, various futurist, I guess you can call them futurist methods around how people, come up with ideas for where they think the future is going to go. Now, for me, I particularly focus on the workplace. And so for me, what a futurist is somebody that picks a particular area, for me it's the workplace, and figures out how that particular area is going to evolve. So I interview a lot of companies, I do a lot of research on these organizations, I read a lot of the research reports that come out from various organizations to see what sort of numbers they're putting forth. And then I have my own methods that I've learned just through books that I've been reading around coming up with scenario planning and just looking at how I think the workplace might evolve. It's kind of an exercise, really. Nobody can predict what the future of work is going to look like. But for me, a futurist, it's kind of somebody that tries to explain and look at trends for where things are going. And that's ultimately what I try to do.
How did you become interested in all this? This isn't probably something that you wake up one day and say, boy, golly, I want to know what the future is going to be like. So I'm going to start researching that. So how did you get into that?
Well, I just had bad experiences working for other people. My first job at a college, I thought was going to be a very exciting job based on what the people that hired me told me. And then one day, the CEO comes out of his office, asks me to go get him a cup of coffee. Prior to that, I was doing data entry and cold calling at this same company. And so I realized that my expectations of what I thought the workplace was going to look like versus what it actually looks like are very, very different. And so ever since then, I became very fascinated with understanding how the workplace is evolving, new management models, new leadership approaches, how technology is entering the workplace. And so I've just made it my goal over the past, almost a decade now, to learn about how the workplace is changing. I do that in a couple of ways. I have a podcast of my own. I do 2 videos a week on YouTube where I pick a particular topic and share my thoughts on it. I have a community that I run called the Future of Work Community, where we have 40 brands from around the world that come together to explore various themes. We host events. So I do a lot to get in touch with these organizations to try to understand how the workplace is changing. And I think that is a really important part of what I do. Sometimes it is coming up with my own ideas that I just, think about or get inspired by, but a lot of it is actually learning from these other organizations and taking what they are telling me and seeing how I can extrapolate that going, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out.
What do you hope that your work will do? Like, what's your greatest hope for the work that you're doing?
Well, I think, I would like a couple things. So first, I try to provide as much educational content as I can around how the workplace is changing. So for employees, I want them to better understand how they can stay relevant in the workplace. What sort of things should they be thinking about? What should they be doing? What is their career going to look like? What areas should they focus on? For managers or leaders, I think, my hope is that they will learn how to become better managers or better leaders and how to create a culture where employees are engaged and inspired to show up to work every day. And for senior level executives and for key stakeholders, I want to provide educational content that shows them there are other options for how work can get done aside from just the traditional assumptions we've always had around, the corporate hierarchy, the big pyramid where everybody at the top has all the information. And so I just try to explore all these different ways of working, and I hope that people will just know that there are other options and they will experiment and test some of these things out within their own company and create a better place to work.
Yeah, yeah. And you've talked to some really interesting people. I was just listening last night to your podcast with Paul Greene from Morningstar, which was it was a fascinating discussion. I didn't really know a lot about their company, and it was interesting to kind of hear some of the stuff on their journey. And boy, you've talked to a lot. I mean, you talked to Bob Chapman, a guy who I know fairly well, which was great that you found us. But you've talked to people from LinkedIn and Hewlett Packard. How did you kind of develop all these connections? Just people that you've read interesting things about or heard interesting things about what they're doing in their company, or how does that come about?
Yeah, a lot of these people are also connected to me. Some of these companies are part of my future of work community. So, if anybody visits fowcommunity.com, you'll see who some of these companies are. So some people are connected through that. Some people are connected with me online through social channels, through Twitter, through Facebook, through LinkedIn. And so I've reached out to organizations that I know are doing interesting things and people that I have relationships with and said, hey, why don't we just talk about it for an hour and see what comes out of it? And that's how the podcast was born.
All the stuff that you've started, the future of work community and, your writing and things like that, and your speaking, how did you get started doing that? I mean, that's, again, it's kind of not something you can just kind of roll out. And maybe it is something you can just kind of roll out of bed one day and say, you know what, that's what I want to do. That is where I want to go in that. And
well, it all started off with a blog many, many years ago. And then it evolved from there, blog, actually it probably first started off with a Facebook page, then a blog, then a Twitter account. I only recently created a Facebook fan page for myself. So I was a little bit behind the times there. But ultimately, I work for myself. So for me, it's very important to build a reputable and credible personal brand and to build that network. So I do it out of necessity. It is part of what I enjoy doing. I love speaking with all these companies and researching these companies. But for me, if I don't do it, I don't have any credibility in the space and I don't have any use to other organizations, right? I mean, part of why companies hire me to speak or to join the community is because they know that there is this network going on. And so I do it out of necessity. I want people to know me as somebody that, quote unquote, owns the future of work. When people think of the future of work, I want them to think Jacob Morgan. And so to do that, I have to be everywhere when it comes to the future of work. I need to be on YouTube. I need to be on Facebook. I need to be on Twitter. I have to have books. I have to have a podcast. I have to have all of this content that educates and provides information in different mediums. And so that's why I do it.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things when you're building something like this, basically if you have a passion for it, and if you have something that a vision that you really want to see through, and you have a great purpose, it's kind of inspiring to see what you're doing, what you're building, because it's an encouragement to other people that they can do that. That's part of the future of work. I mean, that's part of what you're exploring is being able to do those things that you want to do and have a vision for.
Yeah, absolutely. And, keep in mind, when you work for yourself, obviously you're running your own business, you're an entrepreneur. I've been doing this for around 8 years, and I'm constantly inspired by and learning from other people around how they use social channels to build up a network. When I see an author, for example, that has 100,000 people that are liking him on Facebook, or so, I'm fascinated by that. I really want to know, what are these people doing to build an audience? How are they doing it? So, even though you might be an expert in one field, it's always good to know about other fields that are surrounding yours that you can learn from. So, for example, while I might be quote unquote expert in the future of work, I'm always learning about new ways to market myself, or to build a brand, or, how to use Facebook more effectively, or, recently I'm learning about how to use ads through Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn to build an audience and get people to learn more about content. So, you always have to learn, and you always have to find people in different areas that you can learn from and be inspired by.
Yeah. Speaking of learning things, as you talk to people in these companies, as you do these interviews, and even through the work that you do with the future work community, what are kind of some of the trends that you're seeing right now in terms of the future of work? Like, the Morningstar interview that you did for last week's podcast, it was talking about self-management. Zappos is doing the holacracy thing. What are some of the kind of the trends that you're seeing that are happening right now?
Sure. So I by no means see holacracy or self-management as a pervasive trend that organizations are adopting.
Yeah.
In the book that I wrote on the future of work, I have a breakdown of specific things for employees, for managers, and organizations. And, I talk about 5 global trends, globalization, millennials entering the workplace, technologies, mobility, and new behaviors that are impacting all these changes that we're seeing in the workplace. But as far as the most common trends that I'm seeing organizations actually adopt and implement, I think there are a couple. One is there is this emphasis on freedom and flexibility. So I'm seeing more and more organizations go down the path of giving employees freedom and flexibility to select how they work, when they work, where they work. I think an investment in more collaborative technologies is something that I'm continuously seeing, and organizations figuring out how to make use of those technologies. Autonomy is a big one that I'm seeing. More and more employees that I speak with say that they want autonomy in the workplace. So I'm seeing organizations try to figure out ways to give them that. And then I think there is this emphasis of customizing how you work, customizing your career path within the company. I think those are all interesting things. And then finally, I'd say a focus on the employee experience is a big, big shift. Every company that I talk to is always telling me that they want to create a better employee experience. And that's something that we've never heard organizations talk about, in the past 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years. So I think those are some big things that we're seeing.
And one of the things that I've seen in a lot of your stuff and read in a lot of your stuff and talk about in a lot of your stuff is talk about the millennial generation and how that's affecting companies now. Could you talk a little bit about that? How big an impact that's having on the way workplaces are reshaping themselves?
Sure, millennials are of course having a dramatic impact on how work gets done. Sometimes I feel like there's too much emphasis placed on millennials because, keep in mind, they are not the only generation in the workplace. There's still millions of people from other generations that are out there. But the reason why millennials get so much attention is because by 2020, they're going to be the majority of the workplace. And by 2025, they're going to be 75% of the workplace. So even though they might have some similar values and attitudes and expectations to other generations, the fact that there's going to be so many of them is really causing organizations to think about what they should be doing to change how they work, because this is the group of talent that they're going to have to attract. And a lot of millennials don't know what it's like to commute an hour and a half to and from work, to use legacy technologies, to get 250 emails a day. So organizations are really, really having to make some changes to adapt. And I think it's a great thing.
With the fact that, part of this generating this change or spurring on this change is the millennials, was there something wrong with the generations prior that got us to this point where there needs to be some re-looking at processes and how we do things in companies?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with previous generations. I think previous generations just didn't have the voice that the generations now have. There's a lot of transparency through social technologies, through sites like Glassdoor. So people are able to share honest feedback and ideas and experiences about what it's like to work at a company, whereas previous generations had no way to do that. When a lot of these organizations were first created, we always assume that employees have to work at these organizations because they need to, right? They need to because they have expenses, they have bills to pay, they have families, they have mortgages, car payments, and so the only way that you can afford to basically live is to work for these types of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
But over the past, 5-10 years, we've seen the emergence of freelancer platforms. We have sites like Etsy where you can create products and sell them directly to consumers. Become a freelancer on a site like Upwork or freelancer.com. You can be an Uber driver, a Lyft driver. You can rent out your home on Airbnb. You can raise money on Indiegogo or GoFundMe. You can go work for a startup. Like, you are faced with so many opportunities and potential ways that you can earn a living now, that it's really forcing organizations to create a place not where people need to work there, but where they want to actually show up. And technology has also made it very easy for recruiters to leverage sites like LinkedIn to poach employees from one company and bring them into another company.
Mm-hmm.
And so the best way to combat that is to create a great employee experience at your organization. Because if people want to work there, they won't go somewhere else. And I think that's what a lot of organizations are realizing. This shift towards the employee experience has just only recently gained so much attention.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how old you are, but you and I are probably somewhere around the neighborhood of the same age. And so we can probably remember a time where we weren't connected to our cell phones 24/7. You could probably remember actually dialing a phone that sat on a wall, And it's amazing to think about how there's basically been a second industrial revolution in the last 10, 15 years that probably went a lot more quickly than the first one in terms of how things just advance so rapidly. And that right there, it has caused all these options to be available as well, and has completely changed the landscape too. I mean, technology is such a huge driver of what's going on today in companies.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, technology is a very powerful catalyst that's forcing these organizations to change. And like I said, I think it's a good thing because it's about time.
Jacob, talk a little bit more about the future of work community and what it is you guys are doing and some of the things you guys are doing in case, companies listening are interested and want to be involved.
Sure. So ultimately, the future of work community is a place for companies from around the world to come together to explore what the future of work is going to look like. Now, we have this really cool community platform that we built from scratch where members come together and they ask and answer questions, they share best practices, they share advice, they share ideas. They also get access to resources that we create, such as white papers. And we also bring in guest speakers that come and do webinars for all of our members. And we also host 2 events every year on the future of work. And so really what it is, it's a educational and networking environment where companies can learn how the workplace is changing and what they should be doing and what other organizations are doing. So you can imagine it's a very, very valuable resource. And members there talk about everything from freelancers to technology to corporate culture to leadership to flexible work. I mean, there are a lot of conversations that are going on there. So it's really interesting to see.
Mm. So do you have any, kind of maybe interesting stories about things that have come out of the stuff that you're doing with future work? Like any, not, necessarily naming any names or anything, but just kind of interesting stories that you've seen where you've gone, wow, I'm really glad that we were able to, be a conduit for something like that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of stories, you mean specifically in the community?
Yeah, sure. Through the work you guys are doing there, yeah.
Yeah, organizations, first of all, they all have different needs. So some of our members are very interested in technology, so they ask other members to connect on technology-related issues, whereas other members are more interested in strategic or tactical things that aren't technology-related. So, we've had members come in there and ask about what technologies they should be using, what technologies other companies recommend, and they get feedback from others. We've had companies come in and talk about what they can do to change their corporate culture and what other companies have done. And so it's really great that these organizations are willing to open up and share what they're doing to other companies so that they might be able to do the same thing. And some of these companies are competitors, and the fact that they are willing to share and help each other, I think, is very, very encouraging.
Yeah, yeah. What kind of hopes do you have for the future for the I'll say that 5 times fast. What kind of hopes do you have for the future of work community?
Oh yeah, yeah, it's a lot of future. Uh, so the community, we have a couple plans. Obviously, one is to continue to grow it. The community is still relatively new; it's less than a year old. So we obviously want to grow it. Right now, we have just over 40 brands from around the world, ranging from companies like LinkedIn to Air France to Sanofi to Cisco. So we obviously want to grow that to many, many more organizations around the world. We want to focus on creating more educational resources and thought leadership programs. So we're going to be doing member ebooks, member webinars that are going to be public for people to attend. And we want to continue to host more kick-ass events and bring more people together.
We were very grateful for you to have Bob on your podcast a few weeks ago, and it was really nice of you to give him that time, and it was a great conversation. And one thing that I didn't feel like you got a really good chance to kind of address a little bit, it was kind of a discussion you and Bob had about the term management manager, which is a total pet peeve of Bob's. He is a real believer in the fact that those kinds of terms really matter, and that's why we don't use the term manager at Barry-Wehmiller, because as he says in his speeches, you don't manage your wife, you don't manage your friends. I kind of want to give you a little bit of space to talk about that a little bit, because I think it's an interesting kind of discussion in terms of how we think about things and how we how we think about things in the workplace, because words do matter a lot.
Of course, of course. So you're right. I mean, terminology does matter. And I suppose there's a lot that I can say on this. I agree with Bob's perspective that, we don't manage. There's been this long debate between managers and leaders, and I'm of the fundamental belief that any employee within an organization can become a leader, but managers within our organizations must be leaders. And the challenge is that we've spent a lot of time separating managers and leaders, and as a result, we have managers that don't know how to lead, and we have leaders that don't know how to manage. Managers are typically very good at strategy and tactics and building teams and doing that sort of stuff. And leaders are stereotypically the ones that have the vision, the big picture goals. They're good at engaging and inspiring and empowering others. And so my whole argument is that if you are in a position of power, recognized by the company as being in a position of power, you have to have those leadership characteristics. So even though you're called a manager, you need to be a leader first. So before you are put into a position of power where you can build teams and where you can manage financials, you have to be somebody in that position first that can engage and empower and inspire others before you get promoted to that role. And oftentimes what we do is we take people that are good at maintaining the status quo, we promote them, and then we try to give them leadership training. Whereas my approach is that we need to find the leaders within our company, those that are good at the engagement and empowerment, and give them management training. Because I think leadership is almost impossible to teach, but I think management is actually quite easy to teach, or at least much easier than leadership. And so while I do, and I've seen organizations focus on, changing titles. Whirlpool, for example, got rid of management titles and they gave everybody a leadership title. And I'm seeing this happen in a couple different areas in human resources as well. A lot of human resources are being rebranded to chief talent officers, to people operations. I think the name only matters if you do something behind it, right? Simply changing the name does nothing. So you can change names all day long, but if people are still treated the same and everything still works the same, then, good for you. So I don't think managers are bad. I think bad managers are bad, or stupid managers are bad. And the problem is we've just been promoting the wrong types of people. So does the name change make a difference? Our managers, should we get rid of that lingo, that terminology? I think the first priority should be on trying to define what that type of person is, what skill set they should possess, what that person looks like. And only then does it really matter that we change the title. But if you look at this, there are a lot of roles and titles within organizations that are technically outdated that we could get rid of. We have managers, we have directors. I mean, you're not really directing anybody either. You're not really supervising anybody. So, if you were to go through all the titles within your organization and figure out which ones don't make sense, you'd probably end up getting rid of a lot of them, to be honest. But I do agree with Bob that what you call something matters, right? I think that you do get a different feeling when you hear manager versus leader. You do get a different feeling when you hear human resources versus a talent, right? But at the same time, I think it only makes sense to do these things if there is a lot more going on below the surface of just changing the name. Which, when I spoke with Bob, it sounds like there was. I mean, you guys made a lot of changes. You got rid of cages. You allowed employees to, have a little bit more flexibility on the types of work that they're doing. So there was more that went into it than just saying, all right, we're getting rid of all manager titles. Some things you do manage, right? I mean, you do manage financials. You do manage the strategic direction of where the company's going. You do manage how you put together a team, how you disassemble a team if somebody needs to leave the company. So there's some areas that you, as somebody in a position of power, do need to actually manage. But there are just as many areas where you need to be able to do more than manage when it comes to people, right? I mean, you need to act more as a coach, as a mentor, and I think that's where Bob and I definitely agree.
Thanks for listening to the Everybody Matters podcast. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller. Like us on Facebook and follow us on LinkedIn. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Join us again next time, and remember, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.